The stars above Elysium 4 were still burning. Not the real stars. Those were the same cold, distant points of light they had always been. What burned were the remains of ships. Human ships. Cargo freighters, patrol cruisers, civilian transports that had tried to run and never made it past the orbital blockade. They tumbled through the void in pieces, glowing orange and red as their fuel cells cooked off one by one, painting the darkness with the colors of a funeral pyre that no one had asked for and no one could stop. Admiral Marin Voss stood on the bridge of the UCS Defiance and watched them burn. The Defiance was not in good shape. Half its port side was gone, ripped open by a Vithari lance beam during the battle that everyone was already calling the Massacre of Elysium. The ship listed slightly to one side, on its stabilizers fighting a losing war against damaged thrusters. Emergency lights bathed the bridge in red. The air recyclers were struggling, and every breath tasted faintly of smoke and copper. Around Voss, the bridge crew worked in silence. There was nothing to say. They had lost. Not just the battle. They had lost everything. 3 colony worlds. Elysium 4, New Carthage, Korolev Station. Gone. Not conquered, not occupied. Burned. The Vithari did not believe in half measures when it came to what they called correction. They had dropped kinetic bombardment rods from orbit, each one the size of a building, moving at a fraction of the speed of light. The impacts had cracked continents. Cities that had taken decades to build were erased in seconds. Millions of people who had woken up that morning thinking about breakfast and work and their children's school projects were simply gone, turned to ash and vapor and memory. Marin Voss was 61 years old. She had served in the United Solar Confederation Navy for 38 of those years. She had fought pirates in the asteroid belt. She had commanded patrol ships along the outer trade routes. She had shaken hands with ambassadors and attended ceremonies and done all the things that a career officer was supposed to do. None of it had prepared her for this. Her son David had lived on Elysium 4. He had been a teacher there. He taught history to children in a small school in the colony's second-largest city, a place called Meridian. David had sent her a message 3 days before the attack. So he had told her about a student who had written an essay about Earth's oceans. Even though the girl had never seen an ocean in her life, he had sounded happy, proud. Meridian did not exist anymore. Neither did David. Voss had not cried. She had not screamed. She had received the news and something inside her had gone very quiet, like a door closing in a house that would never be warm again. She stood on her broken bridge and watched the debris field and breathed the bad air and waited. She was waiting for the transmission. It came exactly on schedule. The Vithari were nothing if not punctual. The main view screen flickered, and then the face of high-resonance Queleth Vaughn filled the display. The word face was generous. The Vithari were insectoid, tall and angular, and with segmented bodies covered in plates of natural armor that shifted color depending on their mood. Queleth Vaughn's plates were a deep, satisfied purple. He had 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on his elongated head, and they gleamed with the particular brightness that the Vithari displayed when they were pleased with themselves. He was broadcasting on every frequency. Every ship in the system could hear him. Every relay station in human space would carry his words. And beyond that, every species in the galaxy that had access to the Dominion communication network, which was all of them, because the Dominion controlled the communication network, would hear this message. It was not really a peace offer. It was a performance. Queleth Vaughn spoke in the galactic common tongue, his translator rendering his clicking, not buzzing natural language into words that humans could understand. His voice was smooth and calm, the voice of someone who had never once in his very long life doubted that he was right about everything. He spoke of peace. He spoke of order. He spoke of the natural hierarchy of species in the galaxy, a hierarchy that the Vithari Dominion had maintained for 4,000 years through wisdom, strength, and what he called the gentle correction of those who lost their way. Humanity, he explained, had lost its way. The trade violations along the outer rim were merely symptoms of a deeper problem. Humans were young, impulsive. They did not understand how the galaxy worked. They had needed to be taught. The bombardment of 3 colony worlds, the death of approximately 9 million human beings, was the teaching. He was sorry it had been necessary. He really was. The Vithari took no pleasure in correction. But order had to be maintained. The galaxy depended on it. And now, he said, it was time for peace. The terms were simple. Humanity would surrender all shipyard facilities beyond the orbit of Mars. The human fleet would be reduced to 200 vessels, none larger than a light cruiser. A yearly tribute of rare earth minerals, quantities that would strip mine Earth's reserves within a generation, would be delivered to the Dominion as a gesture of good faith and continued compliance. And finally, Vithari cultural observers would be stationed on Earth and all remaining human worlds to ensure that humanity's reintegration into the galactic community proceeded smoothly. Cultural observers. Voss knew what that meant. What every species that had been pacified by the Dominion had received cultural observers. The Rilikai had received them 300 years ago. The Sonduri had received them 500 years before that. The Pale Ones of Yith had received them so long ago that no one remembered what they had been like before. Cultural observers did not observe. They managed, they guided, they slowly and methodically dismantled every aspect of a species' identity that the Dominion found threatening or inconvenient, and they replaced it with compliance. Within a few generations, the pacified species forgot they had ever been anything else. They became tools of the Dominion, working in its mines, crewing its cargo ships, building its infrastructure, alive but not living, existing but not free. That was what peace meant to the Vithari. Hunenquelith Von finished his transmission with a phrase in the old Vithari formal language. The translator rendered it as a blessing, something about harmony and acceptance. Voss did not listen to the translation. She was looking at the debris field. Somewhere in that cloud of shattered metal and frozen bodies was the wreckage of the transport ship that had been trying to evacuate civilians from Elysium 4 when the Vithari fleet had opened fire on it. The transmission ended. The screen went dark. On the bridge of the Defiance, no one moved. Voss turned to her communications officer. The young woman's face was streaked with dried tears, but her hands were steady on her console. That was good. Voss needed steady hands around her right now. Get me a secure line to Earth, Voss said. Priority 1, Parliament encryption. Yes. Well, Admiral. The line took 11 minutes to establish through the damaged relay network. When it connected, Voss found herself looking at the face of Chancellor Idris Okafor. He looked like he had aged 10 years in the past week. His dark skin was gray with exhaustion, and his eyes had the hollow, distant look of a man who had been making impossible decisions and running out of options. Admiral Voss, he said, I've seen the Vithari transmission. So has the entire galaxy, Chancellor. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. I'm convening an emergency session of the Solar Parliament within the hour. I wanted to speak with you first. You want to know if we can fight. Can we? Voss looked at the readouts on her tactical display. The 3rd Expeditionary Fleet, which had been humanity's largest military formation, they had gone into the battle with 47 warships. 12 remained operational. The 1st and 2nd fleets, stationed closer to Earth, were intact but smaller. Combined, humanity had perhaps 90 combat-capable vessels. The Vithari Dominion had tens of thousands. No, Voss said. Not today. Okafor closed his eyes. He looked like a man who had just been told that the last lifeboat was full. Then we accept the terms. I didn't say that, Chancellor. He opened his eyes. Voss leaned forward. I said we can't fight today. I did not say we can never fight. But I need you to understand something. If we accept these terms, if we let the observers onto Earth, if we hand over our shipyards and gut our fleet, then it's over. Not in a year, not in 10 years. In a generation, maybe 2, we won't be human anymore. We will be whatever the Vithari decide we should be. And if we refuse the terms, they'll burn Earth the way they burned Elysium. Yes, they will. Then what are you suggesting, Admiral? I'm suggesting we accept the terms and refuse them at the same time. The emergency session of the Solar Parliament took place in the deep bunker beneath the Parliament building in Geneva. The chamber had been built during the resource wars of the 22nd century, a remnant of an era when humanity had feared its own weapons more than anything the stars might hold. It was ironic. All those old fears of self-destruction seemed almost quaint now. The Parliament was split. This was not surprising. The Parliament was always split. That was what parliaments were for. But this split was different. And this was not about tax policy or infrastructure spending. This was about survival. Chancellor Okafor spoke first. He laid out the situation with the blunt honesty that had won him his office and was now threatening to crush him beneath its weight. The military situation was hopeless in the short term. Humanity could not win a direct confrontation with the Vithari Dominion. The choice appeared to be between submission and extinction. He recommended acceptance of the terms. General Secretary Lian Zhao spoke next. Zhao was 73 years old, small and thin, with a face that looked like it had been carved from old wood. She had been a diplomat before she had been a politician, and she had spent years in the galactic community, negotiating trade deals and cultural exchanges with species that had been navigating interstellar politics since before humans had learned to make fire. She understood the Vithari better than almost anyone on Earth. She stood before the parliament and told them something that most of them did not want to hear. The Vithari have pacified 11 species, she said. Her voice was quiet, but in the silent chamber, every word carried. 11. The Rilikai, the Sonduri, the Pale Ones of Yith, the Dreeth, the Hollow Song Collective. I can name all 11. Do you know what they have in common? They all accepted the peace terms. Every single one of them believed that compliance would protect them. That if they were obedient, if they were good, if they followed the rules and paid the tribute and smiled at the observers, they would survive. She paused. They did survive. Technically, the Rilikai still exist. They crew Vithari cargo ships. They mine Vithari asteroids. They have no government, no culture, no art, no music, no identity. They are alive the way a tool is alive. They function. That is not the same as living. She looked around the chamber. If we accept these terms, we are signing our own slow death. Not today, not tomorrow, but it will come. The chamber erupted. Voices shouted, arguments flew. Some called Zhao a warmonger, others called Okafor a coward. Neither accusation was fair, and both of them knew it. It was Admiral Voss who silenced them. She had been brought to Earth on the fastest ship available, a battered corvette that had pushed its engines past safety limits to make the trip in 30 hours. She stood before the parliament in her dress uniform, which she had not had time to clean, and which still smelled faintly of smoke from the Defiance's bridge. I have something to show you, she said. Classified intelligence. The real reason the Vithari attacked us. She activated a holographic display. Data filled the air above the chamber floor. Technical specifications. Intercepted Vithari communications. Analysis reports from human intelligence operatives who had spent years embedded in Dominion space. The Vithari had not attacked humanity because of trade violations. That was the excuse. The reason was something else entirely. Humanity's faster-than-light technology was different. Every species in the galaxy used the same basic method of FTL travel, a method that the Vithari had developed and shared, or more accurately, imposed, 4,000 years ago. It worked by creating a compressed tunnel through subspace, a method that was reliable, well understood, and, critically, limited. Vithari FTL had a maximum range per jump. It required specific infrastructure. It could be tracked, monitored, and blocked by Vithari technology. Humanity had developed its own FTL drive independently, before making contact with the galactic community. The human quantum fold drive worked on entirely different principles. It folded space-time itself, creating a direct connection between 2 points. It was faster than Vithari FTL. It had longer range. And most importantly, it could not be tracked or blocked by Dominion technology. The Vithari had realized this, and they had realized something else. The quantum fold drive was not just a transportation technology. Its underlying principles could be applied to other things: weapons, shields, communication systems, sensors. The human drive was not just different, it was the seed of a technological revolution that could make Vithari technology obsolete. That was why they had attacked, not to punish, to contain, to crush humanity before it realized what it had. The chamber was silent. Voss looked at them all, the politicians, the leaders, the representatives of a species that had just been beaten nearly to death and was being asked to choose between dying slowly and dying quickly. We have something they fear, she said, something they tried to destroy before we understood its value. They failed. Our research facilities on Earth are intact. Our scientists are alive. The knowledge is not lost. She took a breath. Give me time. Accept the terms. Smile at the observers. Pay the tribute. Be obedient. Be compliant. Be everything they expect us to be. And while they're watching us bow, let me build something in the dark. Chancellor Okafor looked at her for a long time. How much time? 10 years, maybe 12? And then? Voss thought about David, about his students, about the girl who had written an essay about oceans she had never seen. And then they'll wish they had never learned our name. The vote happened that night. It happened in secret, in the deep bunker with no recordings and no minutes. The official vote, the public one, took place the next day. The Solar Parliament of the United Solar Confederation formally accepted the peace terms of the Vithari Dominion. The announcement was broadcast to the galaxy. Humanity surrendered. But in the bunker, in the dark, a different vote had already been cast. The Parliament authorized a black project with no name, no official budget, no paper trail. Everything would be hidden. Everything would be secret. The project would operate outside the normal chain of command, answering only to a small council of 3. The Chancellor, the General Secretary, and the Admiral. They gave the project a name that night, though it would never be spoken aloud in any place where a Vithari observer might hear it. They called it Prometheus, because Prometheus was the one who stole fire from the gods, and the gods had punished him for it. But the fire had stayed with humanity, and in the end, the fire had mattered more than the punishment. Marin Voss walked out of the bunker at 3 in the morning, Geneva time. The sky above the city was clear. She could see the stars. Somewhere up there, the debris of her fleet was still cooling. Somewhere up there, Vithari ships were already moving toward Earth, carrying the observers who would smile and watch and slowly, methodically begin to take apart everything that made humanity what it was. She looked up at the stars, and for the first time since Elysium, she felt something besides grief. It was cold. It was patient. It was the feeling of a woman who had lost everything she loved and had decided, with perfect clarity, what she was going to do about it. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. She was going to make them regret it, all of them. The first Vithari cultural observer arrived on Earth on a Tuesday. His name was Quelith San, and he was young by Vithari standards, which meant he was only about 120 years old. He was tall, like all his kind, standing nearly 3 meters when fully upright, his segmented body covered in armor plates that shifted between shades of green and blue depending on his mood. He had 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on his long, narrow head, and they moved independently of each other, which gave humans who were not used to Vithari the uncomfortable feeling that he was looking at 4 different things at once. He was, in fact, looking at 4 different things at once. This was normal for Vithari. Quelith San was the nephew of High Resonance Quelith Von, which was both the reason he had been given this assignment and the reason he suspected it was not as important as his uncle had made it sound. Earth was a backwater, a pacified backwater at that. The humans had surrendered. They had accepted the terms. The interesting part was over. His job was simple. Watch the humans. Make sure they stayed compliant. File reports. Wait for his rotation to end so he could return to the Dominion core worlds and begin a real career. He arrived at the human capital, a city called Geneva, on a clear spring morning. A delegation was waiting for him at the landing platform. They were led by a woman named Dr. Amara Osei, who had been appointed as the human liaison to the observer program. She was short, round-faced, and smiled constantly. She shook his hand, which was an odd human greeting that involved gripping another person's manipulating appendage and moving it up and down, and told him how honored Earth was to welcome him. Quelith San looked at her smile and saw nothing behind it except warmth and eagerness. Humans were easy to read, and they wore their emotions on their faces like banners. This one was clearly nervous but trying to be friendly. It was, he thought, rather endearing in a pathetic sort of way. He had no idea that Dr. Amara Osei had a doctorate in xenopsychology, spoke 4 galactic languages, and had been selected for this role specifically because she was the best liar on the planet. Over the next several weeks, Quelith San settled into his role. He was given a comfortable residence in Geneva, assigned a staff of human assistants who were unfailingly polite and helpful, and provided with unrestricted access to human cultural institutions, government buildings, and communication networks. The humans were transparent. They opened everything to him. They answered every question. They showed him their schools, their hospitals, their factories, their farms. They showed him their art and their music and their food, and they seemed genuinely pleased when he expressed even the mildest interest in any of it. It was, by every measure, a textbook pacification compliance scenario. The observer training manuals describe this exact pattern. A newly pacified species, still traumatized by correction, would overcompensate with eagerness and cooperation. They would try to please. They would try to prove that they were good, that they had learned their lesson, that they did not deserve further punishment. It usually lasted a few decades before settling into a more stable pattern of quiet obedience. Quelithsan filed his first quarterly report with satisfaction. Humanity was behaving exactly as expected. He did not know about the Oort cloud. The Oort cloud was the vast to dark halo of ice and rock that surrounded the human solar system, stretching nearly a light year from their sun. It was cold. It was empty. It was so far from anything that even the most thorough Vithari sensor sweep would not bother to scan it. It was, in every meaningful sense, the last place anyone would look for anything, which was exactly why Admiral Marin Voss had chosen it. The first ghost yard was established 14 months after the surrender, in the hollowed-out interior of a captured comet that had been redirected into a stable orbit in the deep Oort. The comet was designated OC7. To the small number of people who knew about it, it was called the Cradle. Getting materials to the Cradle was the first and most dangerous challenge. The Vithari monitored human shipping traffic. They tracked every vessel that left Earth orbit. They scanned cargo manifests. They counted ships. They were thorough. They were also predictable. Lian Zhao, the general secretary, had spent her career studying the Vithari. She knew how they thought. She knew what they looked for and, more importantly, what they did not look for. The Vithari were brilliant at pattern recognition. They could spot anomalies in data sets that would take human analysts weeks to find. But they had a blind spot. They assumed that the patterns they were looking for were the only patterns that mattered. The humans exploited this blind spot with a system so simple that it was almost insulting. Every tribute shipment that left Earth for the Dominion was slightly larger than required, not much. 2%, 3%, a rounding error. The Vithari scanners registered the shipments as compliant because they were. They just didn't register that a tiny fraction of each shipment was being quietly diverted en route, dropped off in unmarked containers at predetermined coordinates in the outer solar system, where automated tugs that did not appear on any official registry would collect them and haul them into the dark. Over months, then years, the trickle became a river. Raw materials, fabrication equipment, computer cores, power systems. Everything that was needed to build warships, delivered in pieces so small that no single shipment would raise an alarm, assembled in a place so remote that no one would ever think to look. Engineer Commander Priya Nair arrived at the Cradle 2 years after the surrender. She was 34 years old, brilliant, angry, and possibly the best shipwright humanity had ever produced. However, she had designed the quantum fold drive upgrades that had made human ships faster than anything in the Dominion fleet. She had also watched the Vithari use those same ships for target practice at Elysium. She had not forgiven that. She was not going to forgive it. Nair's task was not to build copies of the old fleet. The old fleet had lost. She was going to build something new, something that used every principle of the quantum fold drive, pushed past its current limits, and applied it not just to propulsion, but to every system on the ship. Shields that folded incoming energy into empty space. Sensors that could detect a ship across a star system by reading the fold signature of its mass. Weapons that could collapse localized space-time around a target, crushing it like a hand closing around an egg. She called the weapon system the Fold Hammer. She did not give it a gentle name. She did not think it deserved one. Building the Fold Hammer took 4 years. The first 3 prototypes failed. The second one nearly killed the entire research team when it accidentally folded a section of the Cradle's interior wall into itself, creating a hole in reality that took 6 hours and a terrifying amount of improvisation to close. Nair lost 2 engineers that day. She carved their names into the wall of her workshop and kept working. The fourth prototype worked. When they tested it on an unmanned target vessel, a decommissioned cargo hauler, the ship simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there. The next, the space it occupied rippled like water, and then it was gone. Not destroyed, not broken apart, removed. The atoms that had made up the ship were scattered across a volume of space roughly the size of a small moon, so thinly distributed that they were effectively nothing. Nair watched the test from the observation deck of the cradle. She did not smile. She thought about Elysium. She thought about the 9 million people who had been alive one morning and atoms the next. She thought about the Vithari using their kinetic rods, and she wondered if Quelith Vaughn had watched the bombardment from an observation deck too. She wondered if he had felt anything at all. She turned to her team. "Build me 1,000 of them," she said. While Nair built weapons in the dark, other parts of Project Prometheus were taking shape. On Earth, in a facility buried beneath the Andes Mountains, Dr. Tomas Reyes was working on the human body. Reyes was a geneticist and cybernetic surgeon. He was also the father of 3 children, a man who cooked elaborate meals for his family every Sunday, and someone who had never held a weapon in his life. He was, by every measure, a gentle person. But gentle people were capable of great determination when they understood what was at stake, and Reyes understood perfectly. The Vithari were physically superior to humans in almost every way. They were faster. They were stronger. Their natural armor could deflect small arms fire. Their reflexes were nearly twice as fast as a human's. In ground combat, a single Vithari warrior was worth roughly 5 human soldiers. This had been demonstrated with terrible clarity during the brief ground engagements at New Carthage, where human Marines had fought with courage and skill and had been cut apart by Vithari soldiers who moved through them like scythes through grain. Project Prometheus was going to change that. The augmentation program was voluntary. This was important to Reyes and important to Admiral Voss. They were not going to force anyone. They were going to ask, and they were going to be honest about what they were asking. The process was painful. The genetic modifications strengthened bones, increased muscle density, and enhanced the nervous system until human reflexes matched Vithari reflexes. The cybernetic implants added neural-linked targeting systems, real-time tactical data feeds, and a suite of combat enhancements that turned a human soldier into something that could stand face-to-face with a Vithari warrior and win. And the process also had a 12% fatality rate in the first year. They asked for volunteers. They expected a few hundred. 12,000 people showed up in the first month. Reyes interviewed every one of them. He wanted to understand why. Why would someone volunteer for a procedure that had a 1 in 8 chance of killing them? The answers varied. Some wanted revenge. Some wanted to protect their families. Some were soldiers who had survived Elysium or New Carthage and could not live with the memory of helplessness. One woman, a Marine sergeant named Coda from New Carthage, told Reyes that she had watched a Vithari soldier tear her squad leader apart with its bare hands, and she had run. She had survived because she had run. She wanted to make sure she never had to run again. Reyes refined the process. The fatality rate dropped. 8%, 5, 3. Over the years, thousands of soldiers went through the program. They came out changed, faster, stronger, harder to kill. They trained in secret facilities carved into mountains and hidden beneath oceans, and they became something that no galactic species had ever faced before. They called themselves the Prometheans. Reyes hated the name. He thought it sounded like something from a bad movie. But it stuck, and eventually he stopped arguing about it. The third arm of Project Prometheus was perhaps the most dangerous, because it operated not in the dark of the Oort cloud or the depths of Earth's mountains, but in the open, right under the Vithari's eyes. Kyle Mwangi was an intelligence officer. He was tall and thin, with a calm, quiet voice and the kind of face that people trusted immediately and forgot just as quickly. Before the war, he had been a cultural attaché at the Human Embassy on the Dominion trade world of Thessic Prime. After the war, he was officially listed as a mid-level bureaucrat in the Human Ministry of Cultural Exchange, a nothing job in a nothing department. In reality, he was building a spy network that spanned the Dominion. Mwangi's great insight was simple. The Vithari were not the only species in the galaxy who hated the Vithari. They were just the only species who had recently been reminded of it. The Dominion ruled over dozens of pacified species. The Rilikai, the Sonduri, the Pale Ones of Yith, and many others. These species had been broken long ago. Their resistance had been crushed. Their cultures had been hollowed out and replaced with obedience. They served the Dominion because they had no choice and because they had forgotten that choice was possible. Mwangi's job was to remind them. He did it slowly, carefully. A conversation here, a past message there. He traveled the Dominion on official cultural exchange business, smiling at Vithari officials and asking polite questions about local customs. And in the quiet moments between meetings, he found the people he was looking for. The Rilikai dock worker who still remembered songs in the old language. The Sonduri engineer who kept a forbidden history book hidden in her quarters. The Pale One of Yith who had once asked his Vithari overseer, quietly and without hope, whether things had always been this way. Mwangi did not promise them revolution, not yet. He promised them something smaller and more dangerous. He promised them that someone remembered who they used to be, and he told them that when the time came, they would have a chance to remember it themselves. The Whisperer network grew in silence. By the 5th year of the Quiet Years, Mwangi had contacts on 40 Dominion worlds. By the 8th year, he had organized cells of operatives among 6 pacified species. By the 10th year, he had a network that could, on a single signal, throw the Dominion's logistics and communications into chaos across a volume of space spanning 3,000 light-years. He never told any of his contacts the full plan. He never told any single person more than they needed to know. He smiled and traveled and filed boring reports about cultural exchange programs, and the Vithari never looked at him twice. Back on Earth, Quelith-san was beginning to feel uneasy. He could not have said exactly when the feeling started. It was not any single thing. It was an accumulation of small things, tiny inconsistencies that he noticed the way you notice a sound that is just slightly wrong. A hum in a room that should be silent. The humans were too compliant. That was the simplest way to put it. Other pacified species went through predictable phases. First resistance, then anger, then grief, then reluctant acceptance, and finally the dull obedience that the Dominion called harmony. Humans had skipped the anger phase. They had jumped straight from grief to compliance, and they had done it faster than any species in Dominion records. That should have been a good thing. It was not a good thing. Quelith-san did not know why, but something about it made his plates shift to an anxious yellow every time he thought about it. There were other things, small things. The human birth rate had not declined. In every other pacification, the subject species' birth rate dropped sharply in the first decade as morale collapsed. Humans were still having children at pre-war rates. More than that, they were still educating those children, not just in basic skills, but in science, mathematics, engineering, history. They were pouring resources into their schools. Why would a broken species invest in its children's future? A broken species did not believe it had a future. Quelith-san filed a report. He titled it Concerning Behavioral Patterns in the Human Subject Species. He detailed his observations. He noted the anomalies. He suggested carefully that further investigation might be warranted. His superiors read the report and filed it without comment. Quelith-san was young. He was inexperienced. The humans were Tier 7 beings, soft and emotional and fragile. They had been corrected. They were compliant. The observer program was running exactly as it should. There was nothing to worry about. Quelith-san received a polite acknowledgement and a suggestion that he focus more on practical compliance metrics and less on behavioral speculation. He tried to let it go. He could not let it go. He started watching more carefully. He attended human social gatherings. He visited schools. He went to concerts and sporting events and community meetings. He watched the humans the way a naturalist watches an animal that is doing something it should not be able to do. And he noticed one more thing. The thing that would stay with him for the rest of his life. They had stopped mourning. In the first 3 years after the surrender, humans had mourned openly and constantly. Memorials for the dead, ceremonies, public grief. This was normal, expected, healthy even, in the way that pacified species processed their defeat. But somewhere around the 4th year, the mourning had stopped. Not gradually, Not the way grief naturally faded over time. It had stopped as if someone had turned off a switch. The memorials were still there, but people did not visit them as often. The ceremonies still happened, but they were shorter, more formal, less emotional. People still talked about the dead, but they talked about them differently. Not with sorrow, with something else. Something that Queleth-san could not identify because he had never seen it before in a pacified species. He added this observation to his next report. He wrote, "They have stopped mourning their dead. This is not acceptance. This is something else entirely." His superiors did not respond to this report at all. In the 12th year of the quiet years, Admiral Maren Voss made her first visit to the ghost yards. She was 73 years old now. Her hair had gone completely white. Her face was lined and weathered. She walked with a slight limp from an old injury that she had never had time to have properly treated. But her eyes were the same eyes they had always been. Dark, clear, absolutely certain. She traveled to the Oort cloud aboard a stealth shuttle that did not officially exist. The trip took 4 days. She spent most of it reviewing reports, eating military rations, and sleeping in short, disciplined intervals the way she had done for 50 years. When the shuttle docked inside OC-7, the cradle, she stepped out into a cavern that was 2 kilometers long and filled with ships. They hung in their berths like sleeping predators, sleek and dark, built from materials that absorbed sensor signals instead of reflecting them. Their hulls were studded with fold drive emitters that gave them a faintly crystalline appearance, as if they were made of frozen lightning. They were beautiful in the way that a blade was beautiful, all function and no waste. Priya Nair met her at the airlock. Nair was 46 now, and the years in the dark had not been kind to her. She was thin and pale, and she had a tremor in her left hand from an accident with a prototype power coupling that had burned out several of her nerves. But when she smiled at Voss, it was the smile of an artist showing someone their greatest work. "How many?" Voss asked. 1,200 warships, 200 support vessels, full ammunition loads, full crew training simulations. We're ready." Voss walked through the cradle. She touched the hull of the new flagship. It was cold under her fingers. She read the name painted on its bow in white letters. UCS Requiem. A requiem was a song for the dead. She stood on the observation deck of the Requiem and looked out at the fleet that should not exist. 1,200 ships built in secret, in the dark, over 12 years, by people who had been told they were beaten and had decided, quietly and without drama, that they were not. She cried. She had not cried since Elysium. She had not allowed herself to cry. There had been too much to do. But now, standing in the dark at the edge of the solar system, looking at the instrument of everything she had worked for, everything she had sacrificed for, she let herself weep. Not from grief, not anymore. From anticipation. Because the quiet years were almost over. The time for silence and obedience and polite smiles was coming to an end. And what was coming next was going to change the galaxy forever. On Earth, in his comfortable residence in Geneva, Queleth-san sat at his desk and stared at the wall. He had filed 17 reports over 12 years. Every one of them had been ignored or dismissed. He had watched the humans smile and comply and cooperate, and he had felt, with growing certainty, that he was watching something he did not understand, something that did not fit any pattern in Dominion history, something new. He picked up his personal log and recorded one final entry for the day. "I have been wrong about many things in my life," he said quietly, his translator humming as it converted his clicking speech into human words that no human would ever hear. "But I do not think I am wrong about this. The humans are not broken. They are not compliant. They are not resigned." He paused. His plates shifted through several colors, settling on a shade of gray that even he had never seen before. "They are waiting." He turned off the log and sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the sounds of a planet that was, despite every observation he had made, absolutely quiet. Too quiet. Lian Zhao knew she was dying. And not in the dramatic, immediate way that soldiers died, in the slow, quiet way that old women died when their bodies had simply decided that enough was enough. She was 85 years old. Her heart was failing. The doctors had told her she had perhaps 6 months, perhaps a year if she was lucky and careful. She did not intend to be careful. She had not been careful for 12 years, and she was not going to start now. She sat in her office in the deep bunker beneath Geneva, the same bunker where the secret vote had been cast 12 years ago, and she read the final status reports from Project Prometheus. The reports were good, better than good. They were everything she had hoped for, and several things she had not dared to hope for. The Ghost Yards held 1,200 warships. The Promethean soldiers numbered 200,000, each one enhanced to match or exceed a Vithari warrior in speed, strength, and reflexes. The Whisperer network had active cells on 40 Dominion worlds, with confirmed operational capacity among 6 pacified species. The Foldhammer had been tested, refined, miniaturized, and installed on every capital ship in the fleet. And the Intelligence Division had mapped the Vithari military infrastructure in detail so complete that Zhao's analysts knew the patrol schedules of individual Vithari fleet commanders. 12 years. 12 years of smiling and bowing and paying tribute and letting the observers walk through their cities like landlords inspecting a property. 12 years of swallowing rage and hiding grief and pretending to be something they were not. 12 years of the most disciplined, patient, incomprehensive deception in the history of any species in the galaxy. It was enough. It was finally enough. Zhao put down the reports and pressed the communication button on her desk. "Send Admiral Voss in," she said. Marin Voss entered the office the way she entered every room, with the quiet, measured steps of someone who had been carrying a heavy weight for a very long time and had learned to walk under it without stumbling. She was 73. Her white hair was cut short. Her uniform was crisp and clean, as it always was, because Voss believed that discipline in small things was discipline in all things. She sat down across from Zhao, and for a moment, the two old women just looked at each other. They had been doing this together for 12 years. Zhao, the politician, the strategist, Wu, the one who managed the deception and kept the secret from 8 billion people who could never know what was being done in their name. And Voss, the soldier, the commander, the one who had turned grief into a weapon and patience into a military doctrine. They had not always agreed. They had argued, sometimes bitterly, about timelines and priorities and acceptable risks, but they had never doubted each other. That mattered more than agreement. "The fleet is ready," Voss said. It was not a question. "The fleet is ready," Zhao confirmed. "Nair reports full operational capacity. The Prometheans are deployed to their staging positions. Mwangi's network is standing by." "And the Foldhammer?" "Every capital ship, tested and armed." Voss nodded. She looked at Zhao's hands. They were thin and spotted with age. They were resting on the desk with a steadiness that was clearly costing her effort. Voss did not comment on it. Zhao would not have wanted her to. "When?" Voss asked. 3 weeks. The tribute convoy leaves on the 14th. The Vithari will have their standard escort pulled forward to receive it. That opens a gap in their patrol coverage along the threshold for approximately 9 hours. 9 hours is enough. It has to be. Zhao reached into her desk and pulled out a small data chip. She placed it on the desk between them. "There's one more thing," she said. "The transmission." Voss looked at the chip. "You want me to record it?" "I want you to record it. It needs to come from you, Marin. You're the one they hit. You're the one who lost everything at Elysium and still stood up. When the galaxy hears this, when the Vithari hear this, it needs to come from someone who has earned the right to say what needs to be said. I'm not a speechwriter, Leon. No, you're something better. You're honest." Zhao smiled, and for a moment she looked like the young diplomat she had been 50 years ago, sharp and certain and unafraid. "I've written speeches my entire career. Beautiful speeches, moving speeches, speeches that changed policy and won elections. But this isn't a speech. This is a declaration, and declarations don't need to be beautiful. They need to be true." Voss picked up the data chip. "I'll record it tonight." "Marin." "Yes?" Zhao met her eyes. "Make it count. For all of them." Voss held her gaze for a long moment. Then she stood, put the chip in her pocket, and walked out. 3 days later, in a sealed recording studio deep beneath the Andes Mountains, Admiral Marin Voss sat in front of a camera and recorded the most important message in human history. She did not write a script. She did not rehearse. She sat in the chair, looked into the lens, and spoke. The recording would not be broadcast for another 18 days. It would be loaded onto every ship in the Ghost Fleet, keyed to transmit simultaneously on every frequency the Vithari monitored, at a precise moment that had been calculated down to the second. When it went out, it would reach every corner of the Dominion within hours. It would be heard by billions of beings across thousands of worlds. It would be translated into every language in the galactic database. But in the moment of recording, it was just an old woman in a chair talking to a camera, saying the things that 8 billion people had been choking on for 12 years. She started simply. My name is Marin Voss. I am an admiral in the United Solar Confederation Navy. 12 years ago, your forces destroyed 3 of our colony worlds and killed 9 million of our people. You called this a corrective measure. Your high resonance called it a necessary lesson. Your Dominion broadcast it to the galaxy as an example of peace through order. She paused, not for dramatic effect, because the next part was hard and she wanted to get it right. I want you to understand something. We heard you. We heard every word. We watched your ships burn our cities. We counted our dead. We accepted your terms. We surrendered our shipyards. We reduced our fleet. We paid your tribute. We let your observers walk through our homes and our schools and our lives. We did everything you asked. Another pause. And you believed it. Her voice did not rise. It did not tremble. It was steady and calm and absolutely cold. You believed it because every other species you've done this to has broken. The Rilakai broke. The Sonduri broke. The pale ones of Yeath broke. 11 species in 4,000 years, and every single one of them accepted what you did to them because they had no choice. You learned from that. You learned that the galaxy is full of species that will submit if you hit them hard enough. You learned that fear is the most efficient tool of governance. You learned that if you burn enough cities and kill enough children, eventually the survivors will stop fighting and start obeying. She leaned forward slightly. You learned the wrong lesson. We didn't break. We didn't submit. We didn't accept. We bowed our heads, and you saw obedience. You saw what every bully sees when someone stops fighting back. You saw weakness, compliance, the natural order asserting itself. You didn't see what was actually happening. You didn't see the shipyards we built in the dark. You didn't see the weapons we forged in secret. You didn't see the soldiers we trained in mountains and under oceans. You didn't see the network we built across your dominion in the cracks you didn't know existed. Among the species you thought you'd broken so thoroughly they'd never remember what freedom felt like. You saw peace. You saw the peace you imposed on us, and you believed it was real. It wasn't. Every day for 12 years, we smiled at your observers and paid your tribute and bowed our heads. And every night for 12 years, we built, we planned, we prepared. And we turned our grief into engineering and our rage into patience and our dead into a promise that we intended to keep. You called it peace. We call it war. And by the time you hear this message, it will have already begun. She stopped. She looked directly into the camera, and anyone who watched the recording later would say that in that moment, they could see 12 years of suppressed fury burning behind her eyes like a star going critical. You're going to regret it. The recording ended. 18 days later, the war began. The timing was precise. It had to be. The entire plan depended on simultaneity, on striking so many targets at once that the Vithari could not respond to any of them effectively before the next blow fell. At exactly 0400 Galactic Standard Time, the last transmission was broadcast. It went out on every frequency. Military channels, civilian broadcasts, emergency bands, diplomatic lines. The Vithari communication network, which the Dominion had built and controlled for millennia, carried the human admiral's words to every corner of their empire. They could not block it. The humans had spent 12 years mapping the network's architecture, and they had seeded it with relay nodes that the Vithari did not know existed. Nodes that ensured the transmission would propagate even if the Dominion cut their primary channels. The message reached the Vithari Threshold Fleet Command, the largest military installation in the Dominion, at 0400. At 0400 the Foldhammer fired. The Threshold was a massive space station orbiting a red dwarf star at the edge of the Dominion's core territory. It was the staging point for the Vithari's primary battle fleet, a concentration of military power that had not been challenged in centuries. 3,000 warships were stationed there, from light patrol craft to dreadnoughts the size of small moons. It was the iron fist of the Dominion, the weapon that had crushed 11 species and that existed as a constant reminder to the galaxy that resistance was not merely futile, but impossible. The UCS Requiem dropped out of fold space 600 kilometers from the station. The Vithari detected it immediately. Alarms screamed. Commanders shouted orders. Weapons powered up. 3,000 ships began to turn toward the single human vessel that had appeared, impossibly, in the heart of the most heavily defended position in the galaxy. They had approximately 4 seconds to wonder how a human ship had gotten there. Then the Requiem fired its fold hammer. The effect was invisible to the naked eye. There was no beam of light, no explosion, no dramatic flash. What happened was that a sphere of space-time approximately 50 kilometers in radius around the Requiem simply changed. The fundamental constants that allowed electronic systems to function, that allowed energy to flow through circuits and computers to process data and engines to generate thrust, were momentarily disrupted. It lasted less than a second. One pulse, one ripple. 800 Vithari warships went dark. Their systems crashed. Their engines died. Their weapons powered down. Their life support failed. 800 ships, including the Threshold station itself, became dead metal hanging in the void. Their crews alive but helpless, trapped in darkness and silence. The remaining 2,200 ships were outside the fold hammer's effective radius. They were fully operational. They were also in complete disarray because 800 of their ships had just vanished from the tactical network without warning, and the commanders of the surviving ships had no idea what had happened or how to respond to a weapon that did not exist in any Vithari database. That was when the rest of the fleet arrived. 1,200 human warships dropped out of fold space in a pattern that Priya Nair had designed herself, a pattern she called the Wreath because it encircled the Vithari formation like a crown of thorns. They did not come out in a cluster. They came out in a distributed net, each ship precisely positioned to cover the maximum number of angles, creating overlapping fields of fire that turned the entire engagement zone into a kill box. The Vithari had never seen anything like it. Their tactical doctrine, refined over 4,000 years of military supremacy, was based on the assumption that FTL travel was linear and predictable. Ships arrived from one direction, they formed up, they advanced. Everything was orderly. Everything followed patterns. Humans did not follow patterns. The human ships moved through space in ways that the Vithari sensors could not track. They folded short distances, appearing and disappearing, striking from unexpected angles, repositioning faster than the Vithari could adjust. They were not faster than Vithari ships in conventional flight. They did not need to be. They were fighting in a dimension that the Vithari did not even know existed. The Battle of the Vithari Threshold lasted 6 hours and 12 minutes. At the end of it, the Vithari Threshold Fleet, the most powerful military formation in the galaxy, the iron fist that had terrified 1,000 worlds for 4,000 years, was broken. Not all of it was destroyed. Voss did not want total destruction. She wanted victory, and she wanted the survivors to carry the news back to the Dominion Corps. She wanted them to tell their commanders what had happened. She wanted the story to spread. She wanted the Vithari to know that the rules had changed. After the battle, Voss broadcast a short message to the surviving Vithari ships. "This is Admiral Voss of the United Solar Confederation. You are free to withdraw. Collect your dead. Tend your wounded. Return to your space. Tell your leaders what happened here." She paused. "Here, and tell them we're coming." Across the galaxy, as the Battle of the Threshold raged, the Whisperer network activated. On the Rilikai homeworld, dock workers who had spent their entire lives loading Vithari cargo ships stopped working. They turned off the loading machines. They sealed the cargo bays, and then they took control of the orbital defense platforms that the Vithari had built to keep them obedient, the platforms that the Rilikai had been quietly studying and subverting for 7 years under Kalimwangi's guidance. On the Sonduri industrial worlds, engineers who had been building Vithari warships for generations introduced catastrophic flaws into the ship's navigation systems. Flaws that would not manifest until the ships attempted to jump to FTL. Flaws that would scatter the ships across random coordinates. A lost and alone and unable to call for help. On 17 other worlds, in dozens of facilities, across a volume of space spanning thousands of light years, the quiet, patient, meticulous work of the Whisperer network bore fruit. Supply lines were cut, communication relays were sabotaged, fuel depots were seized. The vast, complex machinery of the Vithari Dominion, a machine that had run smoothly for 4 millennia because no one had ever dared to put a wrench in its gears, began to grind and stutter and stall. It was not just a human war anymore. It was a galactic uprising. And the Vithari, for the first time in their long and arrogant history, were fighting on every front at once. On Earth, Quelith-san watched the last transmission on his personal display. He watched it alone in his residence in Geneva, often because the human liaison staff had not come to work that morning. Dr. Osei had not answered his calls. The streets outside were quiet, not the quiet of fear, but the quiet of held breath. He listened to Voss's words. He heard the 12 years of suppressed fury in her voice. He heard the promise and the warning and the absolute certainty of a woman who had spent more than a decade preparing for this exact moment. And he understood. He understood why the humans had stopped mourning. He understood why they had complied so quickly and so completely. He understood why the birth rate had not dropped and why the schools were still full and why Dr. Osei had smiled at him so warmly every single day for 12 years. They had been waiting. All of them. Every human on Earth. Every human in the system. In every human everywhere had known or had felt or had hoped that this day was coming. The compliance was not obedience. The smiles were not submission. The silence was not acceptance. It was patience. It was discipline. It was the most terrifying thing Quelith-san had ever witnessed, because it meant that 8 billion individuals had collectively agreed to deceive an empire. And they had done it so well that even an observer whose entire job was to watch for exactly this kind of thing had not seen it coming. He tried to contact the Dominion. He sent emergency transmissions on every channel he had access to. Warning messages, desperate, urgent, frantic messages telling his superiors that everything they believed about humanity was wrong, that the pacification had failed, or that the humans were not broken and had never been broken, and were at this very moment proving it with fire and fury across the galaxy. His messages went out. Some of them were received, but by the time they reached anyone who could act on them, the battle of the threshold was already over, and the Vithari fleet was already burning. He was too late. He had been too late for 12 years. He had been too late from the moment he had filed his first report, and no one had listened. He sat in his residence in Geneva and listened to the sound of a species going to war. Not the sound of weapons or explosions. Earth was quiet. There was nothing to fight here. The sound was something else. It was the sound of a held breath being released, the sound of masks being dropped, the sound of 8 billion people standing up straight for the first time in 12 years. Outside his window, someone was singing. It was an old human song. He did not know the words, but the melody was fierce and bright and unafraid. Quelith-san closed his eyes and listened to it, and for the first time in his life, he felt something that the Vithari had no word for. Fear, not for himself, fear for his people, fear of what they had awakened. Because across 40 star systems, Vithari commanders were receiving the last transmission at the same moment their sensors began to light up with contacts that should not exist. Ships that were not in any database, weapons that did not follow any known physics, a fleet that had appeared from nowhere, fighting with a fury that no pacified species had ever shown. One Vithari fleet commander, a veteran of 6 pacification campaigns, stared at his tactical display as it filled with human signatures. His plates shifted to white, the Vithari color of absolute shock. His executive officer stood beside him, equally frozen, equally lost. The commander spoke. His words were recorded by the ship's log and would later be quoted in every history of the war. "Where," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "did they get a fleet?" No one answered him. Outside the viewport, the human ships were already firing. The galaxy had not seen a war like this in 4,000 years. In truth, the galaxy had never seen a war like this at all. The Vithari had fought wars, certainly. They had fought 11 of them, one for each species they had pacified, and they had won every single one. But those had not been wars in any real sense, and they had been corrections. Brief, brutal demonstrations of overwhelming force followed by surrender and compliance. The Vithari did not know how to fight a war where the other side fought back. They had forgotten that this was possible. Humanity reminded them. In the first 72 hours after the last transmission, the United Solar Confederation struck 14 Vithari military installations across 8 star systems. The attacks were coordinated with a precision that should not have been possible for a species that, according to Dominion intelligence, did not have enough ships to patrol its own solar system. Every strike followed the same pattern. Human ships would appear without warning, their quantum fold drives depositing them exactly where they needed to be. The fold hammer would fire, disabling the closest enemy ships and stations. Then the rest of the fleet would close in and destroy what remained. The Vithari called it impossible. Then they called it lucky. Then they stopped calling it anything and started trying to survive it. Admiral Maren Voss commanded the main fleet from the bridge of the UCS Requiem. She was not a dramatic commander. She did not give rousing speeches before battle. She did not pace the bridge or shout orders or slam her fist on consoles. She sat in her command chair, watched the tactical display, and spoke in a calm, measured voice that carried absolute authority. Her officers had learned to read her moods, not from her voice or her face, but from her hands. When she was confident, her hands rested flat on the arms of her chair. When she was concerned, she laced her fingers together. And when she was about to do something that the enemy would deeply regret, she pressed the tips of her fingers together in a tent and went very still. During the Battle of the Vithari Threshold, her hands had been in that tent formation for most of 6 hours. The Vithari fleet had been the largest and most powerful military formation in the galaxy. It was no longer. After the threshold, Voss divided her fleet into 3 battle groups. The first, which she commanded personally, drove directly toward the Vithari core worlds, pushing through the Dominion's remaining defenses with a relentlessness that bordered on mechanical. The second, under Rear Admiral Chen Wei, swept along the Dominion's northern frontier, hitting supply depots and communication hubs. The third, under Commodore James Adeyemi, Hona moved to support the uprising on the Rilakai homeworld and secure the corridor that would allow liberated species to coordinate their resistance. The Vithari responded as they always did, with force, with overwhelming, disproportionate force. High resonance. Quelith Vaughn, receiving reports of the disaster at the threshold from his command center on the Vithari homeworld, ordered an immediate full mobilization. Every ship in the Dominion fleet, every reserve formation, every patrol vessel, every armed transport was to converge on the human advance and crush it. The Dominion had tens of thousands of warships. The humans had 1,200. The math was simple, except the math was wrong. The Vithari had tens of thousands of ships, but they were spread across 9,000 star systems. Gathering them took time. Moving them required the logistics network that the Whisperer network had just crippled. Fueling them depended on supply lines that Sundari saboteurs had severed. Coordinating them demanded communication relays that Rilakai insurgents had seized. The Dominion's greatest strength, its vast size and reach, became its greatest weakness. It was too big to defend, too spread out to concentrate, too dependent on the infrastructure that a dozen pacified species were now systematically dismantling from the inside. Quelith Vaughn stared at his strategic display and watched his empire come apart like a machine with sand in its gears. Every order he gave arrived late, or not at all. Every fleet he assembled was harassed by local insurgents before it could depart. In every supply convoy he dispatched vanished into ambushes laid by species that had been obedient for centuries and had overnight remembered that they had not always been. He did not understand it. He could not understand it. The Vithari had maintained order for 4,000 years through the simple principle that power was its own justification. They were stronger, therefore they ruled. This was the natural order. This was how the galaxy worked. Species that were corrected stayed corrected. They always had. His intelligence apparatus had categorized humanity as a Tier 7 species. This was a designation that meant, in practical terms, not a threat. Tier 7 species were defined by several characteristics. They were biologically fragile, lacking natural armor, claws, or other physical weapons. They were emotionally unstable, are prone to irrational attachments and sentimentality. They were short-lived, which made long-term planning difficult. They were individually unremarkable in every measurable way. What the Vithari classification system did not measure, because the Vithari had never needed to measure it, was the capacity for collective action driven by spite. It did not measure creativity. It did not measure the willingness to sacrifice comfort, safety, and sometimes life itself for the chance to punch someone who had hurt you so badly that forgetting was not an option, and forgiving was not something you were interested in. The Vithari measured strength. They measured technology. They measured resources. They did not measure rage. 6 weeks into the war, the Vithari struck back. They could not match the humans in tactical ingenuity or in the devastating effectiveness of the Foldhammer, but they still had numbers, and they still had weapons that humans did not. Chief among these were the planet crackers, weapons of such obscene destructive power that even the Dominion used them sparingly. They were, in essence, self-guided kinetic impactors the size of warships, accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed and aimed at a planet's core. Upon impact, they released enough energy to crack the planetary crust like an eggshell. The Vithari had used them only twice in their history, both times on uninhabited worlds, as demonstrations. The threat of their use was usually sufficient. Quelith Vaughn authorized their use against inhabited worlds. The first target was New Helsinki, a human colony of 2 million people on a cold, icy planet in the outer reach. It was not a military target. There were no warships there, no military installations, no strategic value. The Vithari chose it because it was defenseless and because its destruction would send a message. The message was, "We can still hurt you." Commodore Adeyemi's battle group detected the planet cracker on approach, but could not intercept it in time. The weapon struck New Helsinki at 11% of light speed. The impact was visible from orbit. The planet's northern hemisphere collapsed inward. Oceans boiled. The atmosphere caught fire. 2 million people died in approximately 9 seconds. Adeyemi stood on his bridge and watched the planet die, and something in his face went flat and hard and absolutely still. He sent one message to Admiral Voss. "Our New Helsinki is gone. 2 million dead. Awaiting orders." Voss received the message in her quarters aboard the Requiem. She read it twice. She put the data pad down. She closed her eyes and breathed slowly, in and out, for exactly 30 seconds. Then she opened her eyes and contacted Lian Zhao on Earth. Zhao was in a hospital bed. Her heart was failing faster now, and the doctors had told her to rest. She was not resting. She was monitoring the war from a medical suite that had been converted into a command post, surrounded by displays and data feeds and staffed by a team of analysts who pretended not to notice when she had to pause to catch her breath. "They used a planet cracker," Voss said. "New Helsinki." Zhao closed her eyes. She was quiet for a long time. "Dice how many?" 2 million. "Do they have more?" "Intelligence suggests at least 6 more in their arsenal." "Can you stop them?" "We're working on it, but I can't be everywhere at once. They'll hit more colonies before we can secure them all." Zhao opened her eyes. "Then move faster. End this, Marin, before they kill more of our people." "I intend to." "And Marin." "Yes?" "When you get to their homeworld, don't do what they would do. Promise me." Voss was quiet. "Promise me," Zhao said again. Her voice was a whisper now, thin and fragile. "If we become what they are, then everything we've done is meaningless. Everything we've sacrificed. David, the 9 million at Elysium, the 2 million at New Helsinki, all of it. If we become monsters to defeat monsters, then the monsters win." "I promise," Voss said. 3 weeks later, the Vithari used a second planet cracker, this time against a Rilikai world that had joined the uprising. 50 million Rilikai died. The Dominion broadcast the destruction as a warning to all species that had joined the human rebellion. The warning did not have the effect the Vithari intended. Instead of fear, it produced fury. The Rilikai, who had been the most cautious of the rebel species, threw themselves into the war with an intensity that shocked even their human allies. The destruction of their world did not break them. It reminded them why they were fighting. Other species that had been hesitating, waiting to see which side would win before committing, saw the destruction of the Rilikai world and made their choice. Not because the humans were winning, though they were, because the Vithari had just demonstrated again that they were willing to murder an entire world to maintain control. The galaxy looked at the Dominion and saw finally, clearly, what it had always been. Not a government, a hostage taker. Priya Nair was not a soldier. She was an engineer. She had built the fleet. She had designed the Foldhammer. She had spent 12 years in the dark of the Oort cloud, turning human ingenuity and human anger into weapons that could challenge the greatest military power the galaxy had ever known. She had not expected to die in combat. She had expected to survive the war and go home and sleep in a real bed and eat food that did not come out of a military ration pack. She had expected to see the sun again. The Vithari did not give her that option. 8 weeks into the war, a Vithari strike force found the ghost yards. It should not have been possible. When the yards were hidden in the Oort cloud, far from any shipping lane or sensor array. But the Vithari were not stupid, and desperation had a way of sharpening even the dullest mind. A Vithari intelligence officer, working from the simple logic that the human fleet had to have come from somewhere, had traced the faint, quantum fold signatures that 1,200 ships had left in space-time when they departed. The signatures were old and faded, but they were enough. The strike force consisted of 80 warships, including 4 dreadnoughts. Their mission was to destroy the ghost yards and eliminate humanity's ability to repair, resupply, or replace its fleet. It was a good plan. It might have worked. Priya Nair was in the cradle when the alarm sounded. She had 37 ships, support vessels mostly, repair ships and cargo haulers, and a handful of corvettes that had been left behind as a token defense force. Against 80 Vithari warships, it was not a fleet. It was a speed bump. Nair contacted Admiral Voss. The connection was poor. The Oort cloud was not kind to communications. "They've found us," she said. 80 ships, 4 dreadnoughts. How long can you hold?" "Not long, maybe 2 hours. I'm sending the reserve group. They'll be there in 4 hours." "That's 2 hours too late." Silence on the line. "I know," Voss said. Her voice was very quiet. Nair nodded. She was not surprised. She was not afraid. She was angry, but it was the kind of anger that had been burning so long it had become something else. Something steadier. Something that did not shake. "Then I'll buy you the time," she said. "Get here when you can. And Marin, don't let them touch the cradle. Everything we need to end this war is in these yards." "I won't. Priya, I know. Don't waste time on it. Get here." The line cut out. Nair turned to her crew. They were engineers and technicians, not soldiers. Most of them had never fired a weapon in anger. All of them were looking at her with wide eyes, and she could see the fear in their faces, and she did not blame them for it. "Here's the situation," she said. Her voice was calm and clear, the voice of a woman who had spent 12 years solving impossible problems and was about to solve one more. "The Vithari are coming. We can't beat them. We don't need to beat them. We need to slow them down long enough for the main fleet to get here." She looked at the display. 80 red dots approaching. 37 blue dots between them and the cradle. "Ari, I need volunteers for the Archimedes." The Archimedes was her personal ship, a heavy engineering vessel that she had converted years ago into a mobile Foldhammer platform. It was the most powerful single ship in the Ghost Yards, but it was slow, unarmored, and never designed for combat. Using it against a Vithari strike force was like using a hammer to fight a pack of wolves. You might kill a few, but the rest would tear you apart. Every single person on the bridge volunteered. Nair chose 12. The rest she ordered to the cradle's deep shelters. The Battle of the Ghost Yards lasted 2 hours and 14 minutes. Nair positioned her 37 ships in a defensive screen between the Vithari force and the cradle. She used the asteroids of the Oort cloud as cover, while hiding her ships in the shadows of ice mountains and striking from ambush when the Vithari advanced. It was guerrilla warfare in 3 dimensions, fought in the cold and the dark at the edge of the solar system, and it was desperate and brutal and magnificent. The Vithari pushed forward. They had the numbers. They had the firepower. Nair's ships died one by one. each loss narrowing the gap between the enemy and the cradle. Nair fought from the Archimedes, firing the fold hammer at every opportunity, each shot disabling or destroying a Vathari ship, but revealing her position and drawing fire that her unarmored vessel could barely survive. 1 hour in, she had 19 ships left. 1 hour and 30 minutes in, she had 11. 1 hour and 45 minutes in, she had 6. Son and the Vathari dreadnoughts were within firing range of the cradle. Nair made her decision. She ordered her remaining 5 ships to fall back to the cradle and protect the entrance. Then she turned the Archimedes toward the lead dreadnought. The fold hammer needed to be close to be effective against a ship that large. Very close. Closer than the Archimedes could survive once the weapon fired. The energy release at that range would destroy the Archimedes along with the dreadnought. Nair knew this. She had designed the weapon. She knew exactly what would happen. She accelerated toward the dreadnought. The Vathari fired everything they had at her. The Archimedes shuddered and groaned as its hull peeled away in layers, burning off like skin. Warning lights filled the bridge. Systems failed one after another. The ship was dying around her. Sona and she was dying with it, and she did not stop. At a range of 400 meters, close enough that the dreadnought filled her entire viewport, close enough that she could see the individual gun ports on its hull, she fired the fold hammer at full power. The Archimedes and the dreadnought ceased to exist at the same moment. The fold hammer's pulse, amplified by the proximity and the overloaded power systems of the Archimedes, expanded far beyond its normal radius. It washed over the other 3 dreadnoughts and a dozen escort ships. Some went dark. Some broke apart. Some simply vanished. The Vathari strike force, which had entered the Oort cloud with 80 ships, now had 31 operational vessels. They were damaged, disorganized, and leaderless. The cradle was still intact. When the U.S. Sea Reserve Fleet arrived 2 hours later, the remaining Vathari ships were still trying to regroup. They did not get the chance. The Reserve Fleet, enraged by the destruction they found and the wreckage of the Archimedes, tore into the Vathari with a savagery that left no survivors. Admiral Voss received the battle report aboard the Requiem. She read the casualty list. She found Priya Nair's name. She stared at it for a long time. Then she closed the report and went to the bridge. There were names carved into the wall of Nair's workshop in the cradle. The names of the engineers she had lost years ago, when the second fold hammer prototype had failed. After the battle, someone added more names. Nair's was among them. Below all the names, someone had written a single line. They built in the dark so we could fight in the light. The war continued. Voss pressed on. She did not slow down. She could not afford to slow down, because every day the war continued was another day the Vathari might use a planet cracker, another day that people died, another day that the galaxy burned. After every major engagement, she broadcast the same offer to the surviving Vathari forces. Surrender. Accept reasonable terms. End this. They refused every time. She expected this. The Vathari did not know how to surrender. In 4,000 years of dominion, they had never been in a position where surrender was necessary. They did not have a framework for it. They did not have the vocabulary. Surrender was something other species did. It was not something that happened to the Vathari. So the war went on, and the Vathari kept fighting, and they kept losing, and they kept refusing to accept that they were losing. And Voss kept advancing, system by system, battle by battle, pushing deeper and deeper into the Dominion's core. And then 12 weeks after the last transmission, the human fleet entered the Vathari home system. They came out of fold space in a formation that was almost ceremonial. 1,200 ships minus the losses, which were significant. Voss had started with 1,200 and now had just over 800. But 800 was enough. 800 was more than enough, because the Vathari home fleet, the last major formation the Dominion had, was 400 ships, and they were old, and they were tired, and they were afraid. Voss positioned her fleet in a high orbit above the Vathari homeworld. She did not fire. She did not threaten. She simply sat there, 800 warships hanging in the sky like a judgment, and waited. On the surface of the homeworld, high-resonance Quelith Vaughn stared at his sensor display and finally, at last, understood the line from the last transmission. "You're going to regret it." He did. He regretted it with every fiber of his being. He regretted the arrogance. He regretted the cruelty. He regretted the 4,000 years of supremacy that had taught his species that they were untouchable, that the universe had arranged itself for their benefit, that other species existed to serve and obey and be corrected when they forgot their place. He regretted all of it, but it was too late for regret. The human fleet was in his sky. The Dominion was crumbling. And the woman he had dismissed as the broken commander of a broken species was waiting for his answer. He looked at his home, at the ancient cities and the vast forests and the gleaming towers that his people had built over millennia. He looked at everything the Vithari had, everything they were, everything they might lose, and he wondered what the humans were going to do to it. The Vithari homeworld was called Quelith Ar, which meant in their language, the first place. It was a beautiful world. Even Maren Voss, who had spent the better part of a year fighting the species that lived on it, could admit that. She looked at it through the viewport of the Requiem's bridge. Green continents veined with silver rivers, oceans the color of dark amber, mountain ranges that caught the light of the system's twin suns and glowed like beaten copper, cities that sprawled across the landscape in patterns that were not random but designed. She built over thousands of years according to principles of geometry and harmony that the Vithari considered sacred. It was a civilization's home. An entire species' history, culture, art, and memory lived on that world. Every song they had ever sung, every story they had ever told, every child they had ever raised. Voss looked at it, and she thought about Elysium 4. Elysium had been beautiful too. Not as old, not as grand, but beautiful in the way that young things are beautiful, full of potential and rough edges, and the particular brightness that comes from a place that is still becoming what it will be. She remembered the images from before the bombardment. Green fields, white buildings, a school where a girl had written an essay about oceans. The Vithari had looked at Elysium and seen a problem to be corrected. They had dropped their kinetic rods and turned a living world into ash, and they had not lost a moment's sleep over it. Because that was what superior species did. They corrected. They maintained order. They kept the galaxy running smoothly. And if some small, fragile, insignificant species got ground up in the gears, that was simply the cost of doing business. Voss could do the same thing right now. She had the capability. The Requiem's weapons, combined with the fleet's conventional armaments, could reduce Quelith Ar to rubble in a matter of hours. She could crack the planet if she wanted to. She could return the favor. An eye for an eye, a world for a world. Elysium for Quelith Ar. New Helsinki for the Vithari home, New Carthage and Korolev for whatever else was down there. It would be just. By any measure, it would be just. And the Vithari had struck first. They had killed millions. They had tried to destroy humanity, not because humanity had done anything wrong, but because humanity had the potential to challenge their power. They had used planet crackers against civilian populations. They had spent 4,000 years grinding entire species into dust and calling it peace. If anyone in the history of the galaxy deserved to have their world burned, it was the Vithari. Voss sat in her command chair and looked at the beautiful world below her and thought about all of this. Then she thought about the promise she had made to Lian Zhao. Zhao had died 9 days ago. Her heart had finally given out. She had been conscious until the end, monitoring the war from her hospital bed, issuing orders and approving strategies and doing everything in her power to make sure that the things she had helped build would survive her. Her last words, spoken to her chief of staff, had been about the Galactic Compact, the framework for post-war governance that she had been designing in her remaining hours. She had not wasted time on goodbyes. She had not been that kind of woman. Voss had received the news in the middle of a fleet engagement near the Vithari system of Thessic Prime. She had read the message, put it away, fought the battle, won, and then sat alone in her quarters for an hour in complete silence. She had not cried. She was done crying. Zhao would not have wanted tears. Zhao would have wanted results. Now Voss had results. The Vithari fleet was broken. The Dominion was crumbling. A dozen species were free for the first time in centuries, and the homeworld of the Empire that had tried to destroy humanity was sitting below her, defenseless, waiting to see what she would do. She opened a communication channel, not to her fleet, to the surface. This is Admiral Marin Voss of the United Solar Confederation, calling the Vathari leadership. Respond on this frequency. The response took 4 minutes. When it came, the face on the view screen was familiar. Quelith Vaughn, the High Resonance himself, the architect of the pacification of humanity, the one who had ordered the bombardment of Elysium, the one who had called the murder of 9 million people a corrective measure and had broadcast it to the galaxy with plates the color of satisfaction. He did not look satisfied now. His plates were a mottled gray, the Vathari color of deep distress. His 4 eyes, usually bright and sharp, were dull. He looked old. Not in the way that time makes things old, but in the way that defeat does, stripping away the confidence and certainty that had held a person together and leaving only the tired, frightened creature underneath. Admiral Voss, he said. His translator gave his words the flat tone that it always gave Vathari speech, but underneath the translation, Voss could hear the tremor in his clicks. High resonance. They looked at each other through the screens. 2 old enemies, one victorious, one defeated. The weight of everything that had happened between them, everything that had been done and suffered and lost, hung in the silence like smoke. You have won, Quelith Vaughn said. Our fleet is destroyed. Our empire is in revolt. Our allies have abandoned us. You have won completely and absolutely. I acknowledge this. I didn't call to hear you acknowledge your defeat. Then why did you call? To give you a choice. Quelith Vaughn's plates shifted. Confusion. Suspicion. He had expected bombardment. He had expected the kinetic rods, the planet crackers, the fire from orbit that his species had delivered so many times to so many worlds. He had prepared himself for it. He had written his final testament. He had said goodbye to his family. He had not prepared for a choice. What choice? He asked. Voss leaned forward in her chair. 12 years ago, you gave us terms. You told us to surrender our shipyards, gut our fleet, pay tribute, and accept your observers. You told us it was peace. It wasn't peace. It was a death sentence with a long fuse. Well, now, you were going to do to us what you did to the Rilikai and the Sunduri and every other species you've pacified. You were going to erase us. Slowly, carefully, methodically, you were going to take apart everything that made us human until there was nothing left but another set of obedient workers in your empire. I know what we did, Quelith Vaughn said quietly. I know what it was. Good. Because I'm going to give you real terms. Not the slow death you gave us. Not the humiliation and the erasure and the 4,000-year machine that turns peoples into tools. Real terms. Terms that a species can live with and still be itself. She listed them. The Vathari would disarm their offensive fleet, not all of it. They could keep a defensive force, enough to protect their homeworld and their core systems. But the dreadnoughts, with the planet crackers, the weapons of mass destruction that they had used to terrorize the galaxy for millennia, those would be destroyed. The Dominion would dissolve. Not the Vathari people, not their culture, not their civilization, not their right to exist as a species. The political structure, the empire, the system of pacification and subjugation that had treated other species as resources to be managed. That was over. Every pacified species would be granted full independence. The Rilikai, the Sunduri, the Pale Ones of Yith, all of them. Their homeworlds, their rights, their autonomy restored. The Vathari cultural observers would be withdrawn. The tribute systems would be abolished. Reparations would be paid, not in tribute, not in resources stripped from a failing economy, in knowledge. When the Vathari had 4,000 years of scientific and cultural knowledge that they had kept to themselves while their subject species were denied access to it. That knowledge would be shared, freely, with everyone. And finally, a new framework for galactic governance would be established. Not an empire, not a hierarchy, a compact, a voluntary association of species, each with equal standing, each with a voice, each with the right to make their own decisions and live their own lives without the threat of correction. These are my terms, Voss said. They are not negotiable. Quelith Vaughn stared at her for a long time. You could destroy us, he said. You have every reason to. After what we did to Elysium, after New Helsinki, after the Rilikai world, after everything. You could burn Quelithar the way we burned your colonies, and not a single species in the galaxy would blame you. Some would applaud. I know. Then why? Why show mercy? I do not understand this. It is not logical. It is not what we would do. If our positions were reversed, if we held orbit above your world with a fleet that could end your species, we would do it without hesitation, without regret, because that is how the galaxy works. The strong survive, the weak submit. This has been true for longer than your species has existed. You're right, Voss said. That is how the galaxy has worked, under your rules, under your empire. For 4,000 years, you have taught every species in the galaxy that strength means domination, that power means cruelty, that the only relationship between civilizations is predator and prey. She paused. Why we're changing the rules? Quelith Vaughn shook his head. The gesture looked strange on a Vathari, a sideways motion of his elongated skull that made his plates rattle softly. You cannot change nature, Admiral. We're not changing nature. We're changing behavior. There's a difference. She leaned back in her chair. Let me tell you something about humans, High Resonance. We're not better than you. We're not more moral. We're not inherently good. We have done terrible things to each other throughout our history. We have waged wars and committed atrocities and enslaved our own kind. We are capable of every cruelty you are capable of, and probably a few you haven't thought of. Then why? Because we've learned something. It took us thousands of years and we nearly destroyed ourselves learning it. But we learned it. Odd cruelty doesn't end with victory. If I burn your world, I don't end the cycle of violence. I continue it. Your people will survive. Some of them. Somewhere. And they will hate us the way we hated you, and they will build in the dark the way we built in the dark, and they will come for us the way we came for you. And it will never end. It will just keep going, round and round, species after species, world after world, forever. She looked at him steadily. Someone has to stop the cycle. Someone has to be the one who wins and then chooses not to do the thing that victory allows. Not because they're weak, not because they can't, but because they understand that true strength isn't the ability to destroy. It's the ability to choose not to. We are angry enough to burn your world, Quelith Vaughn. Make no mistake about that. I am angry enough. I lost my son on Elysium. I lost my friend in the ghost yards. I have lost more people than I can count to a war that your arrogance started. I am angry in ways that I do not have words for. But I am human enough not to do it. The communication channel was silent for a long time. Quelith Vaughn's plates shifted through colors that had no name in human languages, gray to blue to something almost white. Then slowly they settled into a shade that Voss had never seen on a Vathari before. She did not know the color's name. Later, a xenolinguist would tell her that it was the Vathari color of a concept that translated roughly as understanding that comes too late. I accept your terms, Quelith Vaughn said. The war was over. It took months to implement the peace. Wars end quickly. The things that come after wars take much longer. Now the Dominion dissolved, not in a single dramatic moment, but in a long, complicated, messy process of negotiation, withdrawal, transition, and reconstruction that involved every species in the galaxy and produced enough paperwork to fill a small moon. The pacified species gained their independence. This was harder than it sounded. Some of them, like the Rilikai and the Sunduri, had active resistance movements that were ready to take over governance. Others, like the Pale Ones of Yith, had been subjugated for so long that they did not remember how to govern themselves. They needed help. Humanity provided it, not as new masters, but as partners, advisors, teachers who were willing to learn as much as they taught. The Galactic Compact was ratified on a space station in neutral territory, in a ceremony that was attended by representatives of 29 species, including the Vathari. Lian Zhao's framework, the one she had been working on until the day she died, formed the foundation. It was not perfect. It would need to be revised and updated and argued over for decades, probably centuries. That was fine. That was how living documents worked. That was how cooperation worked. It was messy and slow and frustrating, and it was infinitely better than the alternative. Humanity took no special position in the compact. They did not claim a throne. They did not demand permanent seats or veto powers or tribute. They took exactly the same position as every other member species, one voice among many, equal and no more. This baffled many species. The Vitari, in particular, could not understand it. You won, they said. Ashu, you earned the right to lead. Why would you give that up? The human ambassador to the compact, a young woman named Aisha Okafor, the granddaughter of Chancellor Idris Okafor, gave the answer that would define humanity's role in the galaxy for generations to come. We didn't fight for the right to rule. We fought for the right to be free. And freedom isn't something you can have if you're standing on someone else's neck. 1 year after the end of the war, on the anniversary of the last transmission, a journalist from the Galactic Information Service traveled to Earth to interview Quelith San. The former cultural observer had remained on Earth after the war. He had not been imprisoned or mistreated. The humans had offered him transport home, and he had declined. He had been given a modest apartment in Geneva and a position at the newly established Institute for Interspecies Studies, where he helped translate Vithari cultural texts into human languages and vice versa. He was, by his own admission, not very good at it, but he was trying. The journalist, a Sundari whose species had been free for less than a year, asked Quelith San the question that everyone in the galaxy wanted answered. What do you think of humanity? Quelith San was quiet for a long time. His plates shifted slowly through several colors as he considered his response. The journalist waited. Vithari were not quick conversationalists at the best of times, and this question was not a simple one. Finally, he spoke. I spent 12 years observing them, he said. 12 years living among them, studying them, on cataloging their behaviors and their customs and their habits. I filed 17 reports on them. I noted every anomaly, every inconsistency, every sign that something was not what it appeared to be. And despite all of that, I did not understand them. Not even a little. Not until the last transmission. He paused. The Dominion classified humanity as Tier 7, fragile, emotional, short-lived. By every metric we measured, they were unremarkable. But we were measuring the wrong things. We measured their bodies and found them weak. We measured their technology and found it primitive. We measured their civilization and found it young. And because those measurements told us they were inferior, we believed they were inferior. We did not measure the things that actually mattered. What things? The journalist asked. Their memory, their patience, their ability to carry a wound for 12 years and turn it into a weapon, their willingness to suffer in silence, not because they accepted their suffering, but because they knew that silence was a strategy. We did not measure their creativity, their capacity to build things in the dark that no one had ever imagined. We did not measure their loyalty to each other, the way they held together under pressure that would have shattered any Vithari formation, and we did not measure their mercy. He looked at the journalist. His plates had settled into a deep, steady blue, the Vithari color of honesty. They are the most frightening species I have ever encountered, he said. Not because of their weapons, not because of their fleet or their fold hammer or their Promethean soldiers. Those things are terrifying, yes. Wait, but that is not what frightens me. What frightens you? They had every reason to become monsters. We gave them every reason. We burned their worlds. We killed their children. We tried to erase their identity. We did everything in our power to break them. And when they broke free, they had the power to do the same to us. They could have ended our species. They could have burned Quelithar and called it justice, and the galaxy would have agreed. He stopped. His plates flickered once. A brief flash of that unnamed color. The one that meant understanding that comes too late. And they chose not to. That is what frightens me. Not the violence, not the war, the restraint. Because a species that can endure what they endured and still choose mercy at the moment of absolute power is a species that will outlast everyone. The violent ones burn out. The cruel ones create their own enemies. But a species that knows when not to use its strength, that understands that true power is measured by what you refuse to do with it, that species will still be here long after the rest of us are forgotten. The journalist published the interview. It was read by billions of beings across the galaxy. It was translated into every known language. It was quoted in speeches and academic papers and late-night conversations on 1,000 worlds. On Earth, Admiral Maren Voss read it in her home in a small coastal town where she had retired after the war. She read it once, set it down, and looked out her window at the ocean. She had moved to the coast because David had loved the ocean. He had never seen an ocean on Elysium 4, of course. There were no oceans on Elysium. No, but he had grown up on Earth by the sea, and he had carried the sound of waves with him to the stars. One of his students had written an essay about oceans. Voss wondered sometimes if that girl had been writing about David's stories. She thought about that a lot, about David's stories, about the things we carry with us and the things we leave behind. She got up slowly because she was 74 now, and her body reminded her of this fact every morning, and she walked outside. The air smelled of salt and seaweed. Gulls called overhead. The waves came in and went out, as they always had, as they always would. A month later, she made one final trip. To Elysium 4, the planet was being re-terraformed. It would take decades, maybe centuries, before it was habitable again. But the work had started. Human and Rilakai and Sunduri engineers were working together, pooling their knowledge and their technology to heal a world that had been murdered. It was slow work, patient work, the kind of work that mattered precisely because you would never see it finished. Voss landed near the site where Meridian had been. There was nothing left of the city. The bombardment had been thorough, but the soil was new, brought in from off-world, and someone had planted grass. It was thin and pale, struggling in the weak sunlight, but it was growing. Life, finding a way. It always did. She stood on the new grass and looked up at the sky. It was hazy, the atmosphere still thick with dust from the bombardment. But through the haze, she could see stars. She spoke to David. She told him about the war, about the fleet she had built, in the battles she had fought, in the people she had lost. She told him about Priya Nair, who had died buying time in the dark, about Lian Zhao, who had died planning a peace she would never see, about Kyle Mwangi, who had built a network of whispers that had brought down an empire, about the Promethean soldiers, the Rilakai insurgents, the Sunduri engineers, all the people who had fought and bled and died so that the galaxy could be something better than what the Vithari had made it. She told him about Quelith Vaughn's face when he realized that she was not going to burn his world. She told him about Quelith San's interview and the phrase that the former observer had used, the most frightening species he had ever encountered. She told him it was over. She told him they had won. She told him she had kept her promise. Then she stood in silence for a while, feeling the thin wind on her face and watching the pale grass move and listening to the sounds of a world that was learning how to live again. Below her feet, in the soil that covered the ashes of a city where a boy had taught children about worlds they had never seen, something small and green pushed its way toward the light. On Earth, in the Hall of Remembrance in Geneva, the last transmission was carved into a wall of black granite. Every word, from the first line, "My name is Maren Voss," to the last, "You're going to regret it." The letters were cut deep into the stone, filled with silver, and lit from below so that they glowed faintly in the dim hall, readable from every angle, visible even in the dark. Millions of people visited the wall every year, Aoi humans and Rilakai and Sunduri, and pale ones of Yith and species that had been slaves and species that had been free, and species that had only just arrived in the galactic community and were still learning its history. They came and they read the words and they stood in silence and they thought about what it meant. Below the transmission, carved in the same silver letters, was a single inscription. It had been written by Lian Zhao in the last hours of her life on a scrap of paper that her chief of staff had found on her bedside table after she died. It read, "We called it war, we made it peace, and we will never forget the difference." The grass on Elysium 4 kept growing.